Professor of history for 35 years. And I sat down with him here. He was visiting my home for a few days. And I made the mistake, which was discourteous of me, certainly, but to say that an education in an American university in history is a waste of time because all that's being taught is Rockefeller-approved mythology.
That's right.
And that if you had any idea of what really went on, and I live in that little gray world where pretty much everything comes past me, it's not just that I'm telling my John, who now is on board with me after a year of catching up, saying, where have I been? I had to go through this. Everything I believed had been influenced by fiction and media. Every time you watch a movie, a TV show,
everything,
some sort of issue about terrorism or the Jews or the wars or whatever. I theoretically, I'm a military historian, among other things. But one of my backgrounds here, if you were to go tour battlefields in Europe, I'd be the guy that would take you out and tell you about it. Well, in Germany, Germans would sit down and say, well, Hitler may have been a bad guy or may not, but in World War I, you guys should have been on our side. And then I think, well, I was taught that the evil Germans tried to seize all of Africa. They invaded Belgium, killed all the priests. Hundreds of thousands of people were raped and butchered by the Germans, and then they invaded poor France. Well, not a word of that's true. Not a single word. And it's everything I was taught through as an undergrad and a grad student. It's what I was continually taught. Not a word of anything I learned at university was correct. None of it. Nothing. And there's no way to get an education. Not only that, any book that can be presented to someone at Wellesley, if it isn't something that, and we won't say the Jews because there's no such thing as the Jews as far as I'm concerned. Well, there's a Zionist conspiracy, and if they don't approve, if the book and the class doesn't fit a totally fictional mythology, I mean, what our children, not just our children are taught, what our professors of history in this country believe to be true is so childishly false.
Yeah.
A university education, a Harvard doctorate in history, is the equivalent of from a reality basis of a third-grade education.
No, worse than that, because it's telling you the Easter Bunny's real and Santa Claus is real. That's how bad it is.
That's exactly right, that everything people believe, because it can sit down easily, and there are things that because you're in France, we're not allowed to discuss.
That's right.
But I'll walk to as close an edge I can because you're not in a country with anything resembling free speech, and frankly, I live in a country near to yours, and I'm not allowed to discuss certain things. A few months ago, I began receiving declassified documents outlining a number of agreements made between Adolf Hitler and Zionist groups.
Of course. The transfer agreements.
When I began building an historical perspective showing Hitler and the Zionist groups responsible for establishing the state of Israel, how closely they worked together.
That's right.
And what that tells us, which I'm not allowed to discuss here, but it took a lot of things that I had looked at, a lot of directions I've gone, and have added questions. And all I want, and I'm not selling ideas to people. The idea I'm selling here, I have my own interest. What I want to be, I want to know the truth. I want my children to know the truth. I want my readers, and heaven forbid, the worst thing I can do, and I have 400,000 weekly subscribers. The worst thing I can do is live in a bizarre misconception and lie to people, because all that would make me, is frankly a member of the press. I don't care to be that. I'm not here to sell ideas about Israel or sell ideas about peace or anything else. I only want to know the truth and share the truth, and if we don't have the truth, I want to enter on some sort of quest with others to simply find out what is real. And I feel like, as I've been going through this process, Daryl, I feel like I'm a character in one of the Matrix movies.
Yeah.
That I'm living in some basement somewhere with wires coming out of my stomach, surrounded by oxygenated fluid. And once I get on the other side of the mirror, everything I knew was false. And the idea that you can turn on the television and be told that anyone that asks a question is a conspiracy theorist or a historical revisionist, just because you don't buy into, well, what if, and it's one of the things I keep saying, what if everything you believed was false? And this is what we're talking about, this Harvard-educated or Wellesley-educated individual. If you sit down and ask someone, what do you believe, and why do you believe it? Prove it. I'm telling you, this is my challenge that goes that direction. If you believe something about the war, World War I, World War II, or the establishment of the State of Israel, or who invaded what, or who really is a terrorist, then prove it.
So I started looking into the whole history of archaeology. And, of course, the first thing I did is I looked in the current textbooks. And in the current textbooks, there's absolutely no evidence for extreme human antiquity. There's only evidence supporting the idea that humans like us first came into existence about 150,000 years ago. And before that, according to the textbooks today, there were no human beings like us. There were just more primitive, ape-like human ancestors. So I thought, okay, let me look beyond the textbooks. Let me look into what I call the primary scientific literature. And by that I mean not the textbooks, but original reports by professional archaeologists and geologists and paleontologists published in professional scientific journals of archaeology and anthropology and geology and paleontology and zoology and so on in many different languages. Because of the way I've been brought up, I've got a reading knowledge of most of the European languages like German, French, Russian, Spanish, and so on. So I was able to look not only at the English literature, but literature in many different languages, say from the time of Darwin all the way up to the present. And it took me about 8 years to do that research, to go through the entire primary scientific literature on human origins. And when I did that, I found hundreds of reports of archaeological evidence for extreme human antiquity. And by that I mean reports of human bones, human artifacts, and human footprints, many, many millions of years old. And these reports are there by professional scientists in the professional scientific literature. So that really amazed me. I had to think, well, okay, why are these reports in the professional scientific literature, but they're not in the textbooks? What's going on here? So I determined that there's a process of knowledge filtration going on in the world of science.
Deliberate.
Yes, and of course we do have to engage in some. We all have to engage in some kind of knowledge filtering. We don't just believe everything anybody tells us or puts in front of our face, But if you're going to have a good knowledge filtration system, because there is what I would call a good knowledge filtration system, and there's a bad knowledge filtration system. A good knowledge filtration system would be one where everybody agrees, here are the standards that we're going to judge evidence by, and then they judge all evidence equally by those standards that everyone agrees upon. And that's fine, but what happens in practice is that there's differential application of the standards for evaluating evidence in the world of science. It's, say, like a policeman. He's got the laws to enforce, and maybe for his friends he's very lenient, lets them get away with stuff, and then for people he doesn't like, well,
there's the ticket.
There's the ticket, and not just the ticket, but something extra too. So something like that goes on in the world of science, where if you have evidence that supports a favored theory, it gets treated very leniently. It just goes right through the knowledge filter, like with a free pass. But if you have evidence that radically contradicts a favored theory, it is subjected to very extremely strict standards, so strict that even the evidence that supports so-called supports the favored theory, it would never pass through either. So that's what I call unfair or bad knowledge filtering, and I've demonstrated in Forbidden Archaeology that it does take place, that evidence is often rejected simply because it contradicts the Darwinian theory of human evolution. Just for that reason alone, it's rejected. And of course, once you've made that decision, you can always trump up some other reasons, to make it look like there's some reason to reject the evidence. Usually this takes the form of accusations of hoaxing or mistakes or cheating or things like that, when not actually demonstrating these things, but simply pulling out of thin air some story or making up some possible way in which the evidence could be wrong. So that's why I called the book Forbidden Archaeology, because although this evidence is there in the professional scientific literature, it so radically contradicts the current ideas that scientists are trying to promote in terms of their understanding of human origins, that this evidence just can't be talked about. It can't be included in the textbooks. It's not going to be displayed in the museum. So
no,
that's the sort of thing. So that's basically what the Forbidden Archaeology topic is all about.
What is the significance of the fact that mankind may be millions of years older than science tells us?
Well, what that would mean is that we need new explanations for human origins. And the directions that those new explanations are going in are very, very much against the current scientific theories. After people read my book, Forbidden Archaeology, they started asking me, well, what is the ultimate significance of this? If we didn't evolve from apes, if human beings have always been here, then where did we come from? So that's the direction that things start heading in, and it's the direction that most scientists today don't want to see people go in, because it would mean the dismantling not only of our current scientific ideas about human origins, but it would dismantle the whole materialistic emphasis of human society today. It would wreck the economic system that's been set up to benefit certain people. It would change a whole lot.
Michael, in the course of all your work and your travels, are you beginning to get more and more support for your theories?
Yes, gradually. Of course, the world is now under the control of a kind of an intellectual dictatorship, in the sense that the supporters of the current theories of human origins, the Darwinian evolutionary theories of human origins, have government-enforced monopolies in the education systems around the world. So they exclude all alternative ideas from the official education systems. So that's what we're struggling against. And, of course, the mainstream media generally go along with that. So a lot of times the people who are into the alternative ideas, although they're there, are having to get their sources of information elsewhere, from the mainstream media and from the mainstream official education systems. But there are a lot of people that are at least willing to listen to some alternative ideas. Now, not all of them are like that. Some of them are very close-minded. They don't want to hear what I have to say. They don't want anybody else to hear what I have to say. Sometimes they've tried to stop my lectures and things like that. There's forces within the university who didn't want me to speak there because, first of all, I'm an anti-evolutionist, and second of all, I have a spiritual perspective, which
two things they don't like.
two things they don't like.